Okay, we are up to the second chapter of Iggeres HaTeshuva. These are communal letters written by the Alter Rebbe describing the Chassidus behind Tshuva. So as we often do, we lay out first the sort of parameters to get our bearings, and then we completely upset those parameters. We saw this, of course, in the first section of Tanya, the Sefer Shel Beinanim, where the Alter Rebbe completely reorganizes the concept of a Beinani as not just being a guy who's 50-50, and the Tzaddik is being pretty good, and the Rasha is being evil. We saw this in Shara Yichud V'Amuna, where the Alter Rebbe transforms or changes that perspective that God created the world once upon a time, and instead that God is creating the world at every moment, continuously and constantly. And here in the laws about and the letters about tshuva, which as we described, are letters because we hope to ultimately outgrow the need for tshuva and not be dependent on this any further. We laid out the holoca, quoted the Gemara, and so forth. And the key point, which we're going to focus on in this chapter, that is a real, what do you call it? It's like a disruptor to the concept of tshuva, is the role of fasting. And when we say fasting, we're not only talking about that's the obvious literal fasting, but the whole idea of being I don't want to say self-harm and some, God forbid, recommended or even considered harsh manner, although there are stories in the Gemara of people who would roll in the snow and so forth. But this general idea about being down on myself, which seems to be appropriate or might even feel to be appropriate to be associated with tshuva. That is, that I should just feel that I'm a failure and that I'm terrible and I'm awful and so on. We discussed this much earlier in the Sefer Shel Beinanim, so I don't remember exactly which chapter, where the Alter Rebbe talks about how much we have to avoid that concept called atzvis, commonly translated as depression, but not medical depression, despondence and despair, and I'm terrible and I'm terrible and I'm terrible. Because when I'm thinking that I'm terrible, I'm not likely to go out and go and help people because I'm so terrible. And saying I'm terrible, and fasting and so on, which of course create a physical weakness. And we have the fast days, but as we know, on fast days, we tend to stay home and have headaches, and we're less likely to go out there doing godly things. So obviously we have the required fast days and so on, and they have their purpose, etc. In fact, just as an illustration, unfortunately, we as the Jewish people have had more and more sad things. And there have been suggestions, maybe we should make a fast day for this, maybe we should make a fast day for that. In the beginning of COVID, there was those who were calling for fast days. And again, it's not generally our shita, our philosophy, to institute fast days. Not because we don't see the value of it, but because the consequence tends to be a little bit more self-concerned than it is other concern, where I'm terrible and I'm terrible and I'm terrible. You know what? You be terrible on your own time. Meanwhile, the world needs to be improved, transformed, divinely inspired, etc. So what, in fact, is the role of fasting? So within the concept of tshuva, and we probably all intuit this, even in interpersonal circumstances where we have somebody who maybe has done us wrong, that we have two aspects. One is they have to correct it. They broke it, you fix it. That's it. So there is the corrective. However, even the corrective still leaves us greatly wanting, meaning if I take a simple illustration, if I lend somebody $5 and they don't pay me back, and even if they eventually pay me back, I'm not likely to lend them $5 again. Yes, they repaid me my loss, but they didn't repay me my sleepless nights and my aggravation and my 27 phone calls, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not likely to. Yes, I have no legal claim against them once they pay me back, but there is not that same sense of friendship, trust, and so forth that existed earlier. Now, what do I do if I'm the offender and I want to not just borrow $5 again, but I want to reinstate my relationship with the person whom I offended? I have to do more than just fix it. Because if I just fix it, I haven't really done anything for him. Just to take that analogy half a step further without getting too distracted by it, we know that in Torah, it is prohibited to charge interest. So if I lend someone $5, I'm not allowed, the loaner, the creditor is not allowed to say to the guy, well, I lent you $5, therefore you should help me move my couch up the steps, because that's taking a benefit from having lent him the $5. The only thing I'm entitled to is to get my $5 back. That's the only thing I'm entitled to. But again, it doesn't enrich the relationship, and it doesn't reinstate the relationship if he pays me back the $5, even if he pays me on time. So when there's been a disconnect, when a person has walked away from Hashem, it is halachically sufficient for the person to then fix it. Okay, I have repaid my debt, whatever Torah tells me I have to do, and that's it. But now, for that, we don't need Tanya. For that, we got the books of halacha, tshuva, like we talked about, is a mitzvah, like every mitzvah, and therefore it's got all of the complexities and nuance and so forth as any other mitzvah. So when we talk about doing tshuva, we're not just talking about fixing what I broke in Hasidus. When we're talking about is the panemius of the mitzvah. Now, the term panemius means the essence, the inner. How do we reinstate the relationship? Not just how do I no longer have a legal claim against me because I have executed my duties. Now, we're going to be introducing a term a little bit later on, but I want to talk about it now so it doesn't distract us. The term in Hebrew is lifnei Hashem. And when I use Hashem, I'm talking about specifically the four-letter name of Hashem, Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey, which we do not pronounce phonetically because it's not a word. We've talked about this before, just a moment. All the other names of Hashem are also words. For example, Adoni, which I'm mispronouncing, can mean my boss. He's the boss. He's the authority. Elohim can mean judges, court case, judges, because God is the boss, God is the judge. We talk about God being merciful. We talk about God being all present, etc. The one name that we have, which by the fact that there's a name, it means there's some access point to it, that there is no other use for it. There is no what I'll call sort of secular use for this term, is the four-letter name of Hashem, Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey. And that's why we don't pronounce it phonetically, because it's not a word. So when we talk about Yud, K, Vav, K, that's the colloquialism, we mean that level of Hashem that is beyond any comparable human terminology. So it's beyond boss, authority, merciful, judge, blah, blah, blah. Then we're going to get to a level that we're going to mention here, that is lifnei Hashem. Now, it's a hard word to translate. It means before God. Now, of course, there's nothing greater than God. Nothing came prior to Hashem. So it's not before Hashem, the concept, but it's before Hashem, that is, it is more intensely personal than even that level of Yud Kei Vav Kei, because Yud Kei Vav Kei is still a name. It's still a method through which one person can connect with another, or one person can connect with Hashem. So it already suggests a certain, use the Kabbalistic term, tzimtzum, a certain withholding of Hashem's expression. And there's still a little bit of a arm's distance between Hashem and the person at the level of Yud Kei Vav Kei. Lifnei Hashem, to get more personalized than that, to get more intense than that, is to reach to this level that is necessary in order for us to reinstate this closeness with Hashem, especially post a violation. Now, we are familiar with this. We talk about it a lot during the month of Tishrei. One classic illustration that the Baal Shem Tov introduced to us, which I'm sure many people here are familiar with, is like the prince. You know, every Jewish metaphor is about a prince or a tailor. This is a prince one. So the prince, you know, the king sends him off and he forgets who he is and he loses his way and he winds up living in the streets. And eventually he returns to his father in the palace. He's forgotten all palace protocol and he's dirty and so on. And he just cries out to the king. And the king hears that voice that only the king recognizes. Everyone else just thinks he's some bum screaming out irrationally. But the king races down and embraces him, he's reached beyond king, beyond father. It's just to that most primordial, essential, connected level that has no comparison. It has no dogma, it has no other example within the physical. So that's how we reach to that level. And hopefully we'll be able to make that bridge. Why is it that fasting can potentially reach us to that level? Because just as fasting is going beyond the human, because the most basic human element is to eat. You never find out in nature, you never find an animal that voluntarily will fast because it's not within the character of nature. So as we overcome our nature, we can overcome even this term, which I'm using here, the nature of Hashem, which includes any form of Hashem acknowledging or relating with the creation. And that's this level that we are describing as Lifnei Hashem, deeper, more personal, even than the name of the four letters of Hashem's existence. Okay, so with that introduction, we begin chapter 2, Perek Beis. Kol zeh, everything we have talked about in the previous chapter, which was essentially a summary of the halachic parameters of tshuva, and the Alter Rebbe making it very clear to us that we should not fall into the trap of assigning a scale system to tshuva and say, well, this one is really important, or that one is terrible, and look how hard it is to fix that one, so that one must be bad. This is always this sort of magnitude meter, that sort of tries to measure them, is always a trick of the Nefesh HaBahamis that leads to, well, what I do is not so terrible, but I would never do that. Well, I might do that, but then I would never do that. We can constantly be pushing the goal line. So all that we discussed up above, the Alter Rebbe says, is le'inyan kapara, is for the concept of kapara. Now, we're going to talk a lot about this word kapara. You recognize it, Yom Kippur. I mean, this is a term that we're familiar with. I just want to go two more words, umechilas ha'avon, and waiver of sin. Now, commonly these terms are co-joined, and they're somewhat synonymous, but of course, as we have talked about in so many different contexts, there are no true synonyms in all of Torah, certainly not in Chassidus. The Alter Rebbe is not just putting together words that are unnecessary or redundant. There's always going to be a very particular subtlety associated with these words. So with the word kapara, we find that it has sort of, I don't know if it's two different or two overlapping or two different messages as to what this word means and why this word is so important. So kapara commonly translates as atonement, or like the English word leads us with a nice way to remember it, it's at one-ment. We become one again. That is, there was a sense of distance, there was a sense of betrayal, and now we've repaired it. But there's another, so it means to cleanse. It means to scrub it clean, to erase it. But then there's another aspect to kapara, or that word, which is, we actually just had it in the Parsha, koifer. Koifer means pitch, which goes on the inside of a ship. We had it with Moshe Rabbeinu when it describes the little basket that Miriam puts him in. We have it with Noach, where the Teva has pitch to make it waterproof. What does waterproofing have to do with the atonement? But the idea is that true kapara insulates the person from ever doing it again. And this is a real significant aspect that we will see, that tshuva is not only and not even primarily about the past, it's much more about the future. A classic illustration. If a student comes to the teacher and says, will you erase this demerit that I have? The teacher might reasonably say, well, you know what, come on time for 2 weeks, and then we'll erase this one late note. Pass the next 5 quizzes, and we'll take away this failed quiz. So we're not here only to talk about the past, we're here really more to talk about the future. That's the true evidence that there's been transformation, that there has been change. So the term koifer, which again commonly translates as at one mint, cleansing, hollowing out, all of that kind of stuff, also comes from the word koifer, which is this pitch that waterproofs the inside of a vessel, And in that context, the metaphor is that it waterproofs us against further failure or separation from Hashem. Now, the concept of mechilas ha'avai, forgiveness of sin. Now, the tshuva achieves, as the Alter Rebbe is laying out for us here, a series of stages. The first one is, we talked about it a lot last week, it removes the concept, the status of Russia. As remember, as we talked about as an example, that a person is not eligible to be a witness if they are a Russia. And there's various degrees. Does that mean, like the Alter Rebbe describes in Tanya, what a Russia is, that he would even consider sin? Does it mean if he looked out the window during davening, or is it only more egregious sins? Whatever it may be, it is a form of, tshuva is a form of removing that status. There's a legal status called Russia, and tshuva can return it. However, that's all it does, meaning it doesn't really reinstate my relationship, and it doesn't reinstate the presumption of innocence. I mean, as an example, we have in the story of the spies, everyone remembers, Hashem says, that's it, you're not going into the land. Hashem reflects back and includes the sin of the golden calf. You say, well, the sin of the golden calf, I thought you forgave us about that. Yes, I forgave you that I reinstated it, and God's presence was once again in the camp when you made the Mishkan, and I once again dwell amongst you, but there was still a residue. Just like the kid who says, I promise I'll come on time, and he comes on time once, twice, three, and then he doesn't come on time again. Here it is again. He's right back into his same old bad habits of coming late, of not handing in the quiz, or whatever it may be, because that there's still a residue of it. So that's what quote unquote halachic tshuva accomplishes. For that, we don't need Tanya. Like we said, for that, we have Shulchan Aruch, we got 100 other books. What we're talking about is kapara, which is, again, the eradication of the residue of that sin, which also includes the insulation, preventing us from sinning again. And the second level called mechilas ha'ovay, forgiveness of the sin, shenimcha lo legamre. So he's completely waived. There's no punishment. There's no retribution that we already do. There is potentially a residue of the sin, like we talked about. And what we are going to try and address is, how do we get rid of that? How do we uproot the residue of it so it's completely forgotten? We have a halachic, a minhag, whatever it is, just to illustrate it from a practical impact. God forbid, when a person passes away, so we have the family, and sometimes everybody, to ask from the mechila from the deceased, to ask forgiveness from the deceased. And this is, if there was ever a time that we didn't show proper respect, et cetera, we ask forgiveness. Now, in this context, I mean, just in my own life experience, maybe people have seen this as well, sometimes it's a hard thing to do. People have hard relationships. They have all kinds of, as we say in Spanish, mishigas, that goes on between them and the maybe parent or whoever it was. And it's a very difficult thing. Even though the person is deceased, there still is a resistance, et cetera, et cetera. So at such times, I put on my best rabbi voice, and I try to communicate to them what is the concept of mechila. So curiously, the word mechila, the root of that word, is the word machul. A machul is a circle dance. Jews are clumsy, so we don't do ballroom dancing. We do circle dancing. But there's a message there as well. The message is that just like there is a hollow, so mechila is to hollow out anything that might come between this person, and even if their parent is now deceased, something that may come between them. A chayal, same root word, is a flute. And obviously, if a flute is clogged, it doesn't make any sound. What makes sound? When you allow it to open up and the breath to come through. I don't know anything about music, but a very simple concept that the person blows into the flute and the sound comes through. But if the flute is clogged, it's not going to allow this music to come through. And this is what can happen, that people will, for whatever, we should know from it, but there's there's real issues that sometimes exist between a parent and a child, whatever it may be. Don't want to harp on it. And we tell them, look, you want to let this go. You want to hollow this out and only see it for the opportunity for there to be this flow between it, not have this thing that comes between us, that every time I see the person, I see this person owes me $5. That's a thing that I see, rather than allowing this to flow between. That is this quality called Michaela. Again, we translate it as forgiveness. It's the old joke, this kind of like a perfunctory process. But what it truly means is to hollow out anything that may come between two people. So how do we approach this? Again, we're trying to do more than just, what do I got to do so I won't get yelled at anymore? How many laps do I have to run? How many times do I have to run 1,000 times? I will not do that. Or how many sacrifices do I have to bring? We're trying to get beyond that. So we got to understand, what is it that I have actually done? So number one, what I have done is that I violated the king's instruction. It doesn't matter what I do. And again, this is where we have to be so cautious to fend off the nefesh habahamis that tries to minimize our behavior. Oh, it's not so bad. Oh, come on. What are you making such a big deal out of everything? Yada, yada, yada. So here we're trying to get over that by saying the problem isn't what I did. The problem is I violated the king's instruction. So first of all, we don't know the impact. Told the story about the people on the spaceship, where the Rebbe used the analogy about why violating Shabbos can carry the death penalty. Doesn't seem so bad. Well, again, because we don't know what all these buttons do. So that's the first thing. And therefore, when we can truly achieve this level, ein maskirun leidavar v'chatzi davar b'yem hadin l'anshei al zeh chas v'sholem b'olam haba v'nifta legari min hadin b'olam haba. We can eradicate any form of punishment, even a half punishment, which is a curious concept we'll talk about in a moment, that the person might ever be punished for this, God forbid, and he's completely exempt, totally in Olam Haba. And again, this is important, but it's only, and I use that term a little bit in quotes, halachic tshuva, because again, anybody, even at a personal level, hopefully not, but unfortunately, I can only imagine that everybody has had an experience where someone has wronged them, and then the person has said, okay, what do I got to do? Okay, but then there's still this residual sense of distance from that person. Yes, they apologize, and yes, they even did this or that, but they're still like, I just don't want to be around this person anymore. Now, it could be a little bit my problem, which is worth noting. Just to put in parenthetically, the halachic concept that I have to ask somebody forgiveness 3 times, and if they don't forgive me, the sin is on them. This is not like a childish game, I'm sorry, haha, it's on you. I mean, the concept is, if I truly ask the person for forgiveness 3 times and they're not willing to forgive me, then it's not about me, then it's about them. That's because they want to hold on to it for whatever different Freudian psychological reasons that we can speculate on. We don't want to dwell on that. That's the concept, why it's 3 times. This is not just some sort of game that I said. I mean, if I've done it sincerely, clearly this person is not wanting to forgive me because of something about them, not because of me. What do we mean when we say, when the Alter Rebbe quotes that if a person achieves this level of halachic tshuva, we will not mention anything or even half a thing? What's this idea of half a thing? So this touches on a halachic concept. I know I have my tendency to go down these rabbit holes, so feel free to yank me back out if I get too far afield. But there's a concept here that sheds light on it, not only linguistically, also conceptually. We know, for example, let me say, in general, we have a concept called a shear, a quantity. And less than the quantity is not a violation. A very simple example. How much is a person allowed to eat on Yom Kippur? 0. That's clear. At what threshold is a person liable for the violation of eating on Yom Kippur? Generally, it's what we call a kazayas, the size of an olive, which, we try to make it nice and simple. An olive, everyone knows what an olive is. No, now we have to know how many grams. Look, when was the last time you looked at an olive and said, that's about 2.35 grams, It's like we have the holoca on Shabbos. How hot is hot? Too hot to touch. How hot is that? And there's a machlokes. It's 104 degrees. It's 107 degrees. I mean, whoever touched it, we go, oh, that feels like 106 degrees. No, it's 107. We don't know. Okay, so our never-ending pursuit of making it more complicated. So the rule of thumb is, or not just rule of thumb, the halachic barrier or threshold for the violation of eating on Yom Kippur is, let's say it's 2 ounces. So how much you're allowed to eat? 0. What point do we punish you if you eat 2 ounces? What if you eat 1 ounce? What if a person eats 1 ounce? We're not talking about a sickly person, which is a separate halacha. A person deliberately, consciously, he does it, he's eating 1 ounce. So that's called chatzi davar. It's a half of a matter. So we don't prosecute him because he's only eaten half. So the penalty doesn't apply. Has he violated Hashem's decree? Absolutely. But it's not to the threshold of punishment. Maybe an analogy. If the speed limit is 55, will they give you a ticket for 56? Probably not. Are you allowed to go 56? No. But there's a certain threshold, just to take this one step further, and then we'll come back. So what if a person eats 1 ounce at 2 o'clock and eats 1 ounce at 3 o'clock? Do we say, well, now he's eating a whole ounce? Because half and half is 1. Bing, bing, now we can prosecute him. Or do we say, look, he ate half an ounce, he ate half the quantity, 1 ounce, and that's not punishable, so that's gone. Now we ate another half the quantity, 1 ounce, that's gone. Each one is an independent act. And as you can imagine, there's libraries of analysis about this idea. So when the Alter Rebbe throws in this idea that we don't even mention chatzi davar, meaning halachically, he got away with it. He completely got away with it. He's completely exonerated. So, as we have talked about from the very beginning of Tanya, if a person's greatest goal in life is to make sure they're going to go to heaven, he'll go to heaven. But that's not our objective. We're not here to say, what do I got to do? And I'll go to heaven. For that, you keep a scorecard, you do one more mitzvah than Aveira, and you'll go in the up elevator. We're here for having a meaningful, personal, intense connection and relationship with Hashem. And therefore the Alter Rebbe says, however, you see the period, and then there's so it's like a double interruption. So again, if a person's objective is, well, what are you going to do about it? And the answer is nothing, you got away with it, right? You got away with it. And there are people who live their lives with, basically, what's the least amount I got to do, and I won't get yelled at. Lifnei Hashem, and this is that phrase that we talked about in the beginning. In order for a person to be lirotzoin, now the word rotzai means desired, wanted, but sometimes I think in English we're blessed. When we say what our desires are, they might be some luxuries because Baruch Hashem, we have a roof over our head and we have food in the refrigerator. But rotzain is what we truly, the root of that word is rutz, what we run after. So we're not talking about frivolous indulgences. We're talking about truly what our passion is. And we might think our passion is, fancy things, but that's not what it is. Our ultimate passion is to be aligned with Hashem. There is an interpretation that when the snake persuades Chava to eat from the fruit, and the punishments are meted out, one of the punishment to the snake is that he will eat dust. So the commentaries ask the question, why is that a punishment? If you eat dust, you'll never starve. What does an animal do all day? It looks for food. If your food is dust, you'll never starve. Why is that a punishment? So one interpretation is, it's like a parent would say to a child, here's $10 million, $100 million, pick a number, but don't ever talk to me again. Don't call me. I don't want anything to do with you. So we live in a broad society, not hopefully a Torah society, that says, oh yeah, sure, where do I sign up? But then when we look around and we see people like that, who have no parental guidance, even if they've quote unquote been financially successful, it don't work out so good. So that's what God says to the snake. Here's your food, don't bother me. So that's not l'rotzoin. That's not l'rotzoin. There isn't a desire there. So what can we do now to be l'rotzoin, lifnei Hashem? Again, more personal. It's a hard word to come up with the translation for, because English describes physical things, and the number 5 comes before the number 6. It's standing in front of it, and the word lifnei before suggests 2 separate concepts. Here it's like the idea of panemius. It's within Hashem, deeper, more personal. Again, I can't think of a good English word. If somebody has a better one, please jump in and share it. Umarutza, and to be the one who is being chased after, being desired. V'chaviv, and dear. Lifanav Yisparech. Again, there's that word, before God, but not before, as in Thursday comes before Friday. Means within Hashem. Like it was before this violation. Now, the word chet, we have a bunch of different words for sin because they describe different categories of sin. The word chet is usually associated with sins of omission, or what we might think of as minor. Like little nicks in the armor. Liyah is to be nachas ruach lekoinoim avodasai. That Hashem should have nachas ruach. We're familiar with this word nachas. It literally translates as calm, or pride, or joy. Meaning, again, if somebody's done me something wrong, and I'm not just talking about my $5 analogy, even if it's something harsher, I'm not going to have nachas because I'm always going to be a little bit suspicious about them. If someone has been emotionally harmful, I'm always going to be somewhat suspect. How can they ever regain my trust and regain even my affection, and that I should appreciate what they do and not always see it as what's the trick behind it? What are they conniving? What's the dishonesty there? So what would we do? So here we have a Torah directive. They would bring the carbon olah. Now, the word olah, I'm just going to translate it now as up, like aliyah, to go up. We'll talk about more specifically, burnt offering is the way it's commonly translated, but that's not the literal translation of the word, but that's what it refers to, and we'll get into that in a moment. Afilo mitzvahs aseh kala, even for a quote, and here's where we got to be really cautious, a missed mitzvahs aseh, that's one of the do's as opposed to a violation of the don'ts, that's kala. Now, kala translates as light, as in easily discarded. And that's already, the problem. Because as the Alter Rebbe was quoted, it's in the Gemara, nobody ever consciously violates their relationship with Hashem. The ruach shtus, the spirit of silliness, infiltrates them. So, oh, come on, it's not so bad. So what's called a lightly dismissed mitzvah, again, that grading system is already the problem, which we'll get to. She'ein ba karas umisas bezdin, that is described as not carrying a death penalty. That's what this really incorrect barometer that's imposed upon it is, that it's a sin that does not carry kares. Now, there are actually only two averas. There are only two mitzvahs aseh, two obligatories, two of the dues that non-conformance carries with it a penalty. Usually the penalty is only for active violation of, that is, doing a thou shalt not, but not doing a thou shalt, there's only two. One is bris milah, and the other is bringing the Pesach sacrifice. Okay, like our sages explain in the Torah's Kayanim, which is on the book of Vayikra. Sometimes the whole book of Vayikra is called the Torah's Kohanim, the laws of the Kohanim, because it's all about the sacrifices and the administration and orchestration of the Mishkan. Al pasuk b'nirtza loy, the pasuk that says, and then he will be desired to him. This is Vayikra chapter 1, verses 2 and 3, that he will bring the sacrifice to Hashem, the Olah sacrifice from the cattle. It has to be male. It has to be perfect. That is, healthy and not broken down. He should bring it to the door of the tent of meeting, and he should bring it, and it will be l'rtsoinoi, to the will, lifnei Hashem, before God. The samach yada, who will place his hands al rosha olah, on the head of this up offering, v'nirtzalo, and it will be considered as atonement for him, lichaper, and that's that word, to at one and insulate, as we talked about, for him. Now, Rashi says, what does it mean he is merutza loy, that it's to his benefit? Now, if you're talking about violations that carry with it the death penalty, he's going to get the death penalty. Or if he's going to get lashes. That's what it says. So what does it mean, merutza? It's again talking about the missed opportunity to do a mitzvah. So that's what the Olah can reinstate his status with. The missed opportunity to do a mitzvah. Because if it's an act of violation and it carries a penalty, the penalty is going to be carried out. The Gemara tells us that Rava said that the Olah offering, again, commonly translated as the burnt offering, and I want to talk about that, which is in fact what they did with it. They burnt it, but why it's called Olah, is a voluntary vow. It's a voluntary gift. Because if there's no tshuva, then Hashem doesn't want your meaningless sacrifice. Throughout the books of the prophets, especially those that are reprimanding the Jews in hopes that they will change their ways and fend off the pending destruction of the temple, Hashem constantly refers to sacrifices brought with meaninglessness. And again, just think about this at an interpersonal level. Imagine, God forbid, somebody does you wrong, and then they send you $5. Or they buy you a car. Well, what kind of car? No. But they send you a gift. It's nice, but if you know that that's just attempting to smooth over the problem, to sort of pretend, that I didn't really do anything so terrible, and stop making such a big deal out of everything, it's insulting. Do you think I'm going to be bought off for that and not addressing the core issue? Well, the same thing here. But if there is tshuva, so then what do you need to send the gift for? But this is what it's taught. This is still in the Gemara. If a person omitted a mitzvah's aseh, that is, they didn't do what they were supposed to do, and they did tshuva, he will be forgiven. Absolutely. So what then is the purpose here? The purpose is to bring him back to reinstating the intense closeness with Hashem. So let's look again at this idea of the Olah. The Olah offering was absolutely completely burnt, and that's why it's commonly described as the burnt offering. But the word Olah means to go up, like Aliyah is to go up. What does Aliyah have to do with burnt? So at the simple level, because most other sacrifice, or say every other sacrifice, it's not completely burnt. Parts of it were burnt, parts of it were sometimes eaten by the person who brought the sacrifice, depending on what it was. Parts of it were given to the Kohen, et cetera, et cetera. It all depends. They have all different rules. But there's one distinctive category of sacrifice. The Olah is completely burnt. It's completely, nobody eats anything of it. What is the value of this? Because it is Olah. What is Olah? So we back up here, and this is going to lead into the tshuva. It ties into the concept of tshuva here. It's not that far afield. We know, of course, that Hashem is unique in creation. Human beings cannot create things. We take stuff and we make other stuff. We take a tree and we turn it into a desk. You may recognize the quote from Pirkei Avos that the first set of tongs had to be miraculously created because you need tongs to pull tongue to create tongs. Again, just a simple thing. If they're making it over this blacksmith, so how do you get the tongs out of the fire? You got to have a pair of tongs. Well, who made the first tongs? And the Pirkei Avos says it was a miracle. This isn't a discussion about blacksmithing or about tongs, but the idea is that everything comes from something. Nothing comes from nothing. Everything comes from something. So a person says, I'm a self-made person. Oh yeah, who taught you how to read? Who took care of you when you were a child? Your parents, your teachers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So only Hashem can create something out of nothing. The closest thing that human beings have to be able to create something out of nothing is to have a child. It's not out of nothing, but when you think about the complexity of the human body and what it comes from, it's pretty close to something out of nothing. And this is why the mitzvah of honoring parents is on the first tablet, because it's part of honoring Hashem, because the fact that Hashem has entrusted the capacity to create life to two human beings is a divine gift. So what we're honoring is not just how wonderful our parents are, which hopefully they always are. What we're honoring is the fact that God entrusted them with the capacity to create life. It's not total creation, but it's pretty close. Just as we cannot create something out of nothing, we also cannot destroy. You cannot turn something into nothing. What we can do is turn it into something else. A simple example that we're familiar with, we know that, let's say, God forbid, if somebody finds chametz on Pesach, certainly before Pesach, they're obligated to burn it. So we say, well, what's value is that? Now it's burnt chametz. So they say, no, it's not burnt chametz. When a person burns the chametz and turns it into ash, it is chemically a different entity. It's not chametz that's burnt, it's something else. You have changed it into vapor, I don't know, whatever the laws of physics are. You have changed it into a different entity. So the closest thing we have is exactly that, to burn it, like I said, to burn the chametz. What is the concept of burning the Olah offering? It's the closest thing we have of turning something, the ox or whatever this cattle is, into nothing. Now, it's not nothing, it's vapor and ash. Or we might more profoundly describe it as to discover the nothing that is contained within the something. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but as we've talked about so many times, nothing is the godliness entrusted to us. It's not a thing. And what happens, again, think about all sin. Remember our rule of thumb that all sin is obsession with the immediate. Person makes a budget, and then what happens? Oh, but I couldn't resist. That thing was on sale. I had to buy it. I absolutely committed myself not to, but it was so tempting. We say, yeah, but at the end of the month, I'll worry about it at the end of the month, And at the end of the month me is a different me. End of the month me is all upset at, day 20 of the month that overspent. So what is the remedy for this? That we have to overcome our somethingness. All sin is driven by some benefit, meaning many times a mitzvah may be driven by benefit, but mitzvahs could be done completely selflessly. It is conceptually possible that a person will do something godly with total and complete selflessness. Excuse me. It is possible that a person will do something godly for complete selflessness, but sinning is never selfless. Ein adam chayta v'loy loy. Translation, nobody ever sins and there's nothing in it for him. There's always something in it for him. So all sin is driven by my sense of somethingness. At the most base level, like we talked about before, that he's violating God's will, because don't tell me what to do. The mere fact, you said up, I say down. Or even if I say up, it's because I decided. So the counter to sin, the counter to an overemphasis on my something, is to illustrate the no thing within the something. And that's what Olah does. It goes up, not just up like up to the next floor, but in the sense that I am completely subsumed into something greater than myself. So again, we can't create something from nothing, and we can't really turn something into nothing, but it can be pretty close. The closest we have is to burn it, because then it literally transforms into something else that you can't see, vapor. We've turned this big giant ox into ash and vapor, or whatever it is, in the physics of it, that is transformed. And the concept is not just that I have sacrificed, that is, I have surrendered some value. This cow costs whatever it costs, and now it's gone. And that nobody's having stakes by it because I have a certain pleasure in it, whether it's me or even the Kohen. Well, I'm so happy that he's having stakes. And I get maybe a little favor because I can give it to that Kohen and not this Kohen, whatever it is. There is completely no thing in it for me. It's a complete surrender of my identity into the infinite. I have transformed something into nothing, which is the counter, it's the remedy for all sinful impulse, which is about affirming my somethingness and avoiding that nothingness. So here we go. Pardon me. Hayatzarech lehevi carbon oila. He would bring the carbon oila, that's the up offering, the burnt offering. Afilo mitzvah asay kala, Sheba Karasu Mrs. Bezdin. Even, I'm sorry, I think we did this already, just to go back a moment. Even for the missed opportunity of a, quote, light mitzvah, light being defined as not carrying with it that penalty. Like it says in the first chapter of the Gemara that speaks about sacrifices, zvachim, like from the word mizbeach, zevach is to slaughter, zevachim, plural. The oila, that the, again, up offering, mechaperes, and there's that word, atones, that is both, it cleanses and it insulates, like we talked about, koifer, al mitzvah's essay, for the missed opportunity of a mitzvah, and that's what we read from Rabbah, because if it was for a sin that carried a penalty, then there's the penalty. So what is this oila for? Vihi, and it is daron, a gift, la'acher shenasa tshuva, only after we did tshuva. So again, just because he buys me a car doesn't mean that he's reinstated our relationship. Why? Because there's an essential characteristic associated with it. This is what Hashem, as we mentioned, is commonly reprimanding the Jewish people about their quote-unquote meaningless sacrifices. The nimcholoi ha'oinish, that he is now completely, again, there's that word, nimchal, it is completely, it's a song once again. He's cleared it out for any penalty. Like a king who violated like a person who violates the king, ufias, and he appeases him, al yedei praklitin, through gifts, and he forgives him. Afal pike, nevertheless, shalech deir mincha lefanav, he still sends gifts and offerings, mincha, from the word nach, to calm, lefanav, within him. Now, within him also, I mean, just to take this one step further, gifts that are meaningful to him. That means that I'm attentive to the king. If I send the king something he doesn't want, that means I'm not being meaningful to him. So I don't get to make it up. This is why Hashem gave us parameters for tshuva. And we don't just say, well, just make it up yourself. I mean, if it's really sincere, because then I wind up giving him something he doesn't want. Lirois pnei hamelech, to once again be associated with the king. This concept of, or the term, michaperes, atonement, and this that it says in Torah, that he becomes once again, desired, chased after, pursued, and atoned for. This doesn't just mean that his soul is cleansed and insulated. That means, again, not just that, okay, I'm not going to get yelled at, okay, I'm not going to get penalized, okay, I'm getting away with it, but it means to be, again, at one. I mean, atonement just lays it out very nicely. At one, lifnei Hashem, and there's that word, lifnei, within, to the essence of Hashem. Liyos, that it should be nachas ruach lekoinai, he should bring joy to his owner, master. Like it says, Tamim, he will be perfect, associated with this characteristic. So again, what's happened? He has violated the king, even if he doesn't, because he didn't think it was such a big deal. But yet, he has once again tried to fix it. So he fixes it the best he can fix it. But then there has to be some other aspect associated therewith. So now we understand there's essentially three aspects to tshuva. There's regret for that sin. I regret that. But if I regret that, meaning, okay, I won't steal your watch, but I might insult you. I mean, so there's still a distance, meaning I'm still not ready to trust, right? He's not going to do that again. But is he fully committed to repairing his relationship? So yes, okay, I won't do that again, but I'm going to do other things. Then he gets to the core of the issue. The core of the issue is that I'm doing what I want, and I have not accepted Hashem's authority. Now, we talk about this so much around Rosh Hashanah time, that Hashem wants us to accept that his agenda becomes our agenda. You know, the difference between I'll help out and it becomes mine. When I'm helping, there's my life, and when I can help, I help. And even if I help more than I can help, and so, but still eventually at some point it's mine and it's not yours. I'm sorry, it's mine. No, I'm sorry. It's yours, it's not mine. I got that backwards. Meaning I'm helping you, but it's your thing. But that's what leads us to violating Hashem's will. What Hashem wants is that we should accept his agenda to be our agenda. That we shouldn't just be fans, we should be partners. And therefore, no matter what it is, like the surrender of self, indicated in the carbon Olah, indicated in the up offering, I have completely eradicated, it's an old bittul thing, I've completely eradicated my identity, and I've made my identity his identity. And this is what we talk about at Rosh Hashanah, that we accept Hashem as our king doesn't just mean we say, yeah, you're the biggest, of course, Hashem is the king regardless, he's created the world. The idea is that we make Hashem's agenda our agenda, and that's the insulation that will prevent us from ever sinning, because Hashem's agenda becomes my agenda. I mean, if you've ever hired somebody to do something for you, and then they start doing what they want, you understand the violation. I hired you to paint my house. I told you to paint it blue. Well, I thought it would look nicer in yellow. Well, when it's your house, you'll paint it yellow. This is my house, and I told you to paint it blue. And number three, this is the consequence of that Olah, which is, as we talked about earlier, the commitment for the future. Because to say, oh, I feel terrible, are you going to do it again? Probably. Now, we'll get into that as well, because there seems to be a little bit of falseness, because can I really say I'm never, ever, ever going to do that again? But at least in that moment, that is the level of my commitment. So far we have talked about the role of karbonos in not just halachic legal penalty phase avoidance tshuva, but of course the question is, what are we supposed to do about that? Because we don't have karbonos today. So what are we supposed to do with this? And again, the overarching question about, well, what is the role of fasting? And again, just to mention here, when we say fasting, we're really talking about all forms of beating up myself. Remember, the brothers go to Yosef and they essentially say, punish us and we'll feel better. And Yosef says, I'm not here to punish you. You did something that you need to work out between you and Hashem. And if I send you to bed without dinner, that's not really going to solve your problem. Your problem is something far deeper than that. So what are we supposed to do about this? What's our opportunity for this? And now, she'ein lanu carbon. So we don't have an opportunity for karbonos. What can we do? To once again engender this characteristic. Hatainis hubamakam carbon. Now we have karbonos. I'm sorry, now we have fasting, because we don't have karbonos. We don't have that opportunity. Just to point out, even that word carbon, I know we always translate it as the word sacrifice, but the literal translation of that word, again, is karov, to once again be close with Hashem. Karbonos means karov, to be close, like we talk about, remember the primary pasuk of all of Tanya. Ki karov, behold, it is very near to you. And as the Alter Rebbe explains, near doesn't mean near like we're near to one town and far from another town, but near means karov b'kirbecha, within your very identity, within your very existence. It lives within you, and that's what we are longing for, to be within Hashem. Almost like the Alter Rebbe describes the flame that seems like it wants to jump off the candle, or the child holding on to his mother's skirt and he wants to just sort of crawl into his mother. He doesn't want to go to kindergarten. He doesn't want to be separated. That's the longing to be subsumed within the infinity of Hashem. Like it says in the Gemara. The Gemara is a reference to, it happens to be the first volume of all of the Talmud. It's page 17a, that Reb Sheshes, when he would fast, at the end, he would say, Rabbeinu Shalom, Hashem, you know that in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, if a person would sin, he could bring a carbon, and he would offer up the fats and the blood of the carbon, and this brought him to this kapara, this atonement, this at one mint. Now I kept my fast, and therefore my fat and blood, my body, my physical body has been diminished. May it be your will, Yehi Ratzon, that just like if I had offered on the altar an animal that would have sacrificed its blood and its fat, may the forfeiture of my blood and my fat be as an offering before you. So this is the idea that the role of fasting achieves the same objective in this context as Karbonos used to do. And again, it's not just about the suffering. And here's where we got to be real delicate. It maybe seems incredibly obvious, but we've probably all met people, maybe even had the experience where when we have some form of suffering, whether it's being bored in the service or sitting there for hours, there's a certain sense, wow, this must be holy. It was so boring. It was so painful. It must have been good. It must have been virtuous. And sometimes, and the Alter Rebbe talks about this in the Sefer Shel Beinanim, about how sadness, people can wallow in sadness because we have a tendency, not us, of course, to dismiss happy people as being shallow. Fat, dumb, and happy, they're shallow. Serious people are somber. Serious people are sad, and they're all consumed with the horrors of life. And they're, again, it's how, I'm a little bit describing it in a comic strip form, like a cartoon, but we've probably all met people like that who feel this sort of virtue in how somber and serious, when everybody's joyous, but the world is coming to an end and so forth. Oh, you're so naive, or you're so Pollyanna about it, and so that's not what we're headed for here. And this is, again, why the Alter Rebbe is going to, or one of the aspects of the Alter Rebbe going to so much lengths to dissuade us from the common notion that the form of tshuva is to beat myself up, either literally through fasting or other forms of self-denigration. You may recall a quote from much earlier in Tanya from the Alter Rebbe quotes, B'chol Eitzav Yehei Moisar, translation, in all depression, there is profit. So people say, see, it's advocating this despondence. And Alter Rebbe says, no, the point is that out of that, you should turn it around into something positive. And the Alter Rebbe's emphasis that we should avoid it, even if it comes from spiritual matters. I am a terrible davener. I am not so charitable. I'm not kind. I'm not helpful. I'm not thoughtful, etc. This is tachbulas hayetzer, he describes it as. It's the tricks of the Yetzer Hara. Is there ever a time for it? Yes, if you control it and you sit down and you do a real self-analysis and you sort of do an inventory and you find those flaws within your life, and then you utilize that as a catalyst to move forward and say, okay, so as a result of how down I am on this characteristic, I am going to be committed to being kinder, thoughtful, more patient, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then it springs forward, but not to soak in it. And again, it may strike us as very obvious, but there is, and again, with Talmudic support, a whole school of thought about the importance of fasting and about berating myself and thinking about how terrible I am, et cetera, and that's associated with tshuva. And here the Alter Rebbe is not just trying to put a happy face on everything. He's trying to help us understand conceptually what that value is. And again, the idea is that we diminish our aggression of self, the I am, because all sin begins with, don't tell me what to do, I'll do. And that fasting diminishes physically our physical self that allows our spiritual self to come out. But as we'll see, it becomes more nuanced as the chapter develops. Okay, we'll stop here. We'll continue next.